Hi, everyone. And yeah, thank you for joining us. So I'm the head of coffee and customer success here at ROEST. So my job is to look after the support team and try and help you guys, that is our customers, to get the most out of their machines. I was supposed to be joined by Sveta today, but unfortunately something's come up, so he can't make it, but I will do my best to answer the questions without him. But I'm going to go straight into the spiel, and if anything comes up while I'm talking, don't be shy, we'll come back to it at the end if you have questions about it. So very exciting today to be finally kind of unveiling our automated production roaster at the P3000. And this is a very compact, but incredibly powerful machine. And we like to call it the ultimate overachiever. And so what I wanted to do today is to show you why we use that phrase, and then maybe to give you a little bit of an idea of what to expect if you decide to go ahead and install this machine in your own roastery. So first, we can talk a bit about what the machine can do. And the first thing to say really is that it can roast a lot more coffee than you might expect. So the P3000 is fully convection based. And with convection heating, you can heat beans very quickly and very evenly with no risk of scorching. And the P3000 is so fast and so efficient at heat transfer that with just a 3 kilo batch size, you can roast 25 kilos an hour. So that's the same throughput as machines that are twice as big as this. And what that means is if you're operating this machine for 4 days a week, you can easily be roasting more than half a ton of coffee quite comfortably. And that means, if you're using that as your business, you can be roasting half a ton and you still have plenty of time to work on the other parts of your business because the process is fully automated. And then at the same time, the level of precision and control that you get from this machine is second to none because this machine is packed with sensors. We have temperature sensors measuring all the different parts of the machine, the air and the beans in multiple different places. We're measuring the pressure. We're even collecting audio and visual data from right inside the drum. And this means the P3000 gives you an incredibly rich picture of the roasting environment, which means you have very tight control over your roasting. And more importantly, perhaps, it gives you perfect replication from one batch to the next. And then, of course, the P3000 also comes with all of the features that ROEST is already famous for. So things like the automatic first crack detection, the automated between batch protocols, and then of course the intuitive web-based software that we use to control the roaster that you can also use to manage your roastery. And what all this means is that the P3000 is a really great way to get started with a new business. You can lean on that automation to take most of the work off your hands and let you focus on other parts of growing the business. But at the same time, for more established roasteries, the P3000 gives you that level of control and precision that is ideal for roasting your super rare micro lots, or even for doing pilot scale batches so that you can really nail the profile development for your production roasts. And then because of that perfect replication between one batch and the next, you can also set the P3000 up for larger scale production with a kind of modular approach. So running multiple units side by side, operating the same profiles. Because of that consistency, you can do larger scale production. And we have some customers that are embracing this way of working with the P3000 already. But really the easiest way to show you what the machine can do is for us to roast a batch. And that starts with creating a profile. So I'm going to move over to our profile creation screen. Here we are. And if you use the sample roasters, or if you've seen the sample roasters, this will already be familiar to you. But for those of you that haven't seen this before, this is what our roast profiles look like. So the roast profile on our machines is a little bit different to what you might be used to from your data logging software. In our case, the profile is a set of instructions that tells the machine how we want the coffee to be roasted. And this curve, this green line here, is the inlet temperature. So that's the temperature of the air coming into the roaster. And then down here, we can control the drum speed and the fan speed at the same time. And this curve here is made up of just a few points. And if we want to modify the curve, it's super easy. You can just click and drag the points and the algorithm will fill in the gaps and create the curve. And so you can create quite complex roast curves with just a few points if you want to. And these points On this profile are fixed points in time, but if you prefer, you can set them to trigger based on bean temperature. And when you do this, that allows your profile to adjust a bit according to how the beans behave in the roaster, because then you're saying to the roaster, okay, I want you to change the temperature according to how far through the roasting process the beans have reached. And so your profile then will stretch or compress according to how quickly the beans actually absorb that heat and roast. And then over here on the left, we tell the machine how to decide when to end the roast. And you can choose to end the roast based on total roast time, based on a target bean temperature, or based on development time. And if you choose development time, then the roaster will mark first crack automatically based on sound. It will count down the development time, and then it will end the batch. And you can choose either a fixed time or, as we have here, a ratio. So we've got a development time ratio here of 11%. And that's what I have on the profile that's loaded on the machine right now. Once your profile is set and loaded onto the machine, then all you need to do is load in the green coffee and hit start. So we can move off the screen sharing for a bit, and I'll just get the roast started. So I have 3 kilos here of coffee, green coffee, and load it in. Right, and I dropped 1 little bean. There we go. Okay, so load in the green coffee, press start, and at this point, your work here is done, basically. So the machine is loading the green coffee right now. The roast process will start, and then the machine will start following the profile. It'll mark the stages of the roast automatically. It'll mark first crack. It'll count down the development time, and then the roast will end. And the machine will take care of everything else. So while we're roasting, I'm going to talk a little bit about all of the things that this machine is doing to ensure that every roast comes out perfectly. And the first thing is to talk a bit about the temperature sensors that are in here. So on most roasting machines, you have 2, maybe 3 temperature sensors monitoring the bean temperature and the environmental temperature. That's the most common. On the P3000, we have rather more than that. In fact, we have 16 temperature sensors in here. So we're measuring the temperature in a lot of different places, the beans, the air, the machine itself in various points. We're even measuring the temperature of the green coffee while it's sitting inside the hopper. And then for the most important measurements, so for the bean temperature, the inlet temperature, and the drum temperature, the ones that are really driving the roast, we take an average reading of several different probes. And this means that the readings can be much more accurate, they're much more stable, and probes can be very fast and responsive because we don't need to use smoothing to create averages. We're averaging over 4 or 6 different probes instead. So you get much more readable, but very, very responsive and accurate data out of those average readings. The other thing that it allows us to do is it gives us the potential to start calibrating the probes against each other. So thermocouples have a tendency to drift over time, and normally as a roaster, that's something you have to just adjust for in your profile. But here we can actually monitor the thermocouple drift and calibrate them against each other. And then the next thing to show you is on the front here, you can hopefully just about see that there's a view from the bean camera. So this gives you a live view right inside the drum of how the beans are developing during the roast. And the idea is that this means you don't have to use a tryer, because what we found is every time you pull a tryer, you're letting in a little bit of cold air, and that little bit of cold air makes your roast just slightly less consistent. And that for us is unacceptable. So we did away with the tryer and we built this camera system instead. And you can see on the front of the screen how the beans are developing. But this also creates the opportunity for us to add visual data to your roasting logs as well. And we're working on tools right now to record the visual data into your roast logs, and then to help you analyze things like the color changes or the size changes of beans during roasting. So we think there's a lot of potential for this tool to help you get even better results out of your roasts. And then there are even more sensors coming. So right now we're working on measuring ambient humidity and then airflow volume. And I want to talk about that one just a little bit. On most roasters, you control airflow by fan speed or perhaps by drum pressure. And both of those are proxy measurements for the real thing, which is the actual amount of air that you're moving through the machine. But we've put in sensors that actually measure the volume of air. And if you can do that, you can calculate the heat transfer in the machine with a pretty impressive degree of accuracy. And this allows you to do, this level of control allows you to do kind of interesting things when it comes to profile development or profile transfer. And one example is I was able to create 3 different profiles with the exact same roast outcome. So identical roasting curves within less than a degree of difference, identical roasting outcomes in terms of a few seconds of roast time, a few grams of weight loss, but at 3 completely different temperatures. And we do that by controlling the airflow. And things like that just showcase the kind of control this machine has. And we're really excited to see how you guys, how the experienced roasters, our customers, can use these tools and push roasting to its limits with the kind of control that this machine gives you. Okay, and at this point, if I don't do anything else, the roast will continue into first crack and finish automatically. But now I want to show you what happens when I take over and do some manual control of the roast. So if we can go back to screen sharing, KB, I'm going to go into the live view. And here you can see the live readings from all of our temperature probes. And one little thing to point out is we're showing the most basic, the most important information here. But as you can see down here, there are a lot of sensors that you can also drill into if you want to see even more of this data in your live view. And now I want to show you what happens when I make some manual changes. So on the front of the roaster here, I can control the power, I can control the airflow, and I can control the drum speed. And you can switch between manual and automatic mode for each of those independently. So you can take over control of the power, but let the drum speed and the fan speed be automatic. You can switch back to automatic on one and into manual on the other. And so that you have complete freedom over which parts of the machine you want to take control of. But right now I'm going to grab the power, make a change, and I've just cranked the power up by about 5%. So not a huge change, but we're putting a little bit more heat into the roaster. And if you watch in the live view, you can see that straight away, the inlet temperature is going up. So we have a very fast response time to temperature changes in the roaster. And as we get a little bit further on, you can see that the bean temperature rate of rise has also plateaued because we're putting a little bit more heat in. And in fact, it's already creeping up. So when you make changes on this roaster, you see the effects of those changes very, very quickly. And that's partly because it's convection-based. Convection is fast. The airflow, there's a lot of airflow. So those changes actually propagate into the machine very quickly. But it's also because of what I talked about earlier. We have very fast, very responsive temperature probes. So you make a change, the beans respond very quickly, and the temperature probes pick that up very quickly. And this is a bit different to roasting on a conventional drum roaster, where the mass of the drum holds so much heat that as the roast progresses, it's very hard to override. You can be desperately trying to turn down the gas as you approach first crack, but the heat in the drum is carrying you through. And this machine, it's a very different feeling that the change you make is reflected straight away. So I'm going to go back to automatic mode. And now you can see that the roaster is attempting to go back to the profile. And now we're into first crack. And at the bottom of the graph here, you can see something that's unique to roast machines. These orange lines here are the cracks. So the machine marks not just the moment of first crack, but it marks every single crack that it hears on your roast log. So now you can see not just the moment that first crack happened, but you can get a measure of how intense first crack was, how many cracks the machine can hear, if they're spread out or clustered together, if there's early cracks or not. And all of this is just one more measure of the consistency and the development of your coffee. So the machine marks first crack automatically, counted down the development time, and now the coffee has dropped into the cooling tray, and that's it. So apart from that little excursion into manual roasting, I didn't have to do anything. And the idea behind this roaster is that if you are using the automation to the full, you only need to put in about 5 minutes of work every hour. If you weigh out your green coffee, you load it into the hopper, you collect it at the end. If that takes you 30, 40 seconds per batch, that's less than 5 minutes work every hour. And you can be using the rest of the time to work on your business, to do things that are more important to you. That's the idea. But you're never waiting that long because the roast time can be pretty short. This roast was just over 7 minutes. And this is a full 3 kilogram batch. So when we say 3 kilos, we really mean it. 7 minutes for me is plenty fast enough, but we have headroom. You can see if you saw on the live view, sorry, we've gone off the screen sharing. The gray line under here is the power. And you can see that the power started at about 50%, climbed up to about 75%, 78%, and then came back down again. So we could be roasting even faster than this if we wanted to. But yeah, okay. So that's it for the screen share, KB. So now the roasting is finished. I want to talk a bit about what happens when we get to the end of the roasting day. And so far, the machine has made our lives nice and easy. The automation reduces the amount of work you have to do. That's all great. But then we get into cleaning and maintenance. And perhaps this is not your favorite part of being a roaster, but we've done everything we can to make this as easy as possible as well. And I want to just give you a few examples. So the first thing is emptying the chaff. And the P3000 has a built-in cyclone at the back. The chaff collects at the bottom. And then there's an auger, which is kind of like a screw that pushes the chaff out of the back into this outlet and into the bin that you can see there in the picture. And this is completely cold, so changing it is very easy. You just need to power down the fans, open up the bin, empty it out, hook it back up, and you're good to go again. So this process is relatively straightforward, relatively simple. And then at the end of the day, I would just empty the chaff, and then I would put a vacuum cleaner into that outlet there, just vacuum it out a little bit, and for a daily clean, that's enough. And then the next thing that we would go to clean is the cooling tray. And on some roasters, cleaning the cooling tray can be a bit of a challenge. You might need to disassemble the roaster, the motor, or the arms. But something we've done on here to make it easier to clean is we just put it on a hinge. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. This out of the way. So even though there's coffee inside it, I can open up the cooling tray and I can get in underneath and behind. So at the end of the day, I'd pull the cooling tray out, get in under here with a brush and a vacuum, brush out any chaff that's collected in here. And then there's 2 mesh air filters that are kind of collecting any stray bits of chaff and preventing them going into the fans. You can just pull those out, give them again a quick brush and a vacuum, and that's it. So cleaning out the cooling tray, even like the full deep clean underneath the cooling tray, is made very simple. And then the only other thing that I would do for the end of day clean is just with a cloth, wipe out any dust that's collected in the hopper, wipe off any dust that's collected on the very nice. Wipe out any dust that's collected on the air inlets, and that's enough for the end of the day clean. Now, there are some parts that over a longer period of time, you'll want to do some deep cleaning, and how often you need to do this will depend on how much you roast and on how dark you roast. But even for the deep cleaning, again, we've done everything we can to make it as easy as possible. And I'll give you some examples. So one example is the cyclone. And the cyclone is a fanless design. So depending on your roaster, you may have experienced having to take apart a cyclone and disassemble the fan, and cleaning the fan is often the nastiest part of trying to get a cyclone maintenance done. But here, the cyclone has no fan. The fans are all, in fact, the heating fans on this machine are all cold side. So they're only handling cold filtered air, which means that the maintenance requirements on them is greatly reduced, basically zero, unless something really, really strange happens. The cyclone itself has no fan. So to clean it out, all you have to do is pop off the exhaust, get in there with a stiff brush, vacuum out any residue that you free up, and then put the exhaust back on. So again, we've tried to make it simple. Same with the chaff outlet. So I mentioned there's this auger, which is the screw pushing the chaff out. When it comes to deep cleaning that, all you've got to do is open up the outlet, pull the screw out towards you, clean it off with a brush and a vacuum up inside underneath the cyclone, and then you can slot the screw back in, tighten it back up, and that's it. So it's super, super simple. And then the other parts that will need occasional deep cleaning are things like the ducting, which is something that you would need to clean just the same as you would on any roaster of this size. And then when it comes to things like repairs and maintenance, we followed the same principle as we do for our sample roasters. And that is the idea of we use an open design. It's a principle where we try and make the machine as easy as possible to open up, to get inside, to repair or to replace parts as you need to. And what this means is if you want to save on a call out, or if you just need to get back up and running as quickly as possible and you can't wait for a technician to drive out to you, as much as possible, we've tried to design it so that you can do those small repairs yourself. And me and my team are here to help you with that process. So the support, the online support is free and unlimited. We're here to help you if there are any maintenance work that you need to do. And then, of course, if you don't want to do that work, or if there are any parts of the maintenance that you're not comfortable with, or you just simply don't have time, you can work with technicians. And if you have a technician that you already know and trust, we're very happy to work with them, give them the guides and the information they need to do that work for you. Or we are also developing a network of technicians in all the countries where we operate, so that there will be people, at least in your country, who are familiar with the machine, who can do that work for you. So there's a lot of different options when it comes to looking after the maintenance. And if all of that has convinced you that the P3000 is the right machine for you, then I want to give you just a little bit of an idea of what you need to get the roaster set up. And the first thing is power. So this machine right here is configured for 3-phase power. And in Europe, that means 400 volts, or well, anywhere between 380 and 415 volts, 3-phase of power, and then it draws 16 amps. And that is a setup that is very common across Europe and in many other countries as well. So those are the machines that we are building and shipping right now. There are going to be other configurations. So there is a single-phase version coming. There will be other voltages available. But if you have a setup that it doesn't have 3-phase, then get in touch with us, get in touch with the sales team, and we can work with you to work out what your options are and which electrical configuration will be best for you, because there will be different options available. Then the roaster, of course, needs to be connected to ventilation. So there are 2 outlets on the machine. On the top, you can just about see the main exhaust outlet comes out vertically upwards from the cyclone. And then on the back, this pipe here is coming from the bean cooler. And they're kept separate, and it's best if you join those to separate ducts so that they don't interfere with each other. But if you need to, you can combine them together into one larger duct, which is using a Y-shaped connector. And if you do that, that allows you to connect them to a single stack, for example, if that's something that you need to do. So again, best to keep them separate, best to keep your runs of ducting as short and as straight as possible. But if you need to do a longer run, if you need to do something more complex, if you need to join them into one duct, you can. If you have very specific requirements, then again, get in touch with us. You can email support@roestcoffee.com, and we'll be happy to help you, to kind of guide you and your ventilation techs through what you need. And then in terms of size, so the roaster itself, as you can see, it just sits on an ordinary bench top. It's about 80 kilos in weight, so it needs to be able to support that very securely. And then in dimensions, the roaster is 445 millimeters wide, 907 deep, and 807 high. But you do need to leave a little bit of extra space all around so that there's airflow and that there's access to panels. So we recommend at least 80 centimeters of space on the sides and the back. And then again, at the back, and especially like below the roaster, you need to leave space for the chaff collection. So if we go back to the picture of the chaff bin, this is what it looks like at the back of the roaster. The bin hangs down the back. So you need to leave some space kind of behind the tabletop for your chaff collection. Now you don't have to, this is the bin that comes with the roaster by default, but you don't have to use this. This uses standard tri-clamp connections. So if you want to use a bigger container, or if you have some other system that you want to connect your chaff to, this is designed to be a standard connection so that you can use other options if you want to. But either way, the chaff collection will be down the back, so that's something you need to leave space for. And those are the main things to take care of when you are thinking about installation. But if you need more detail, if you want drawings, if you want some advice on how to fit this machine into your space, then again, get in touch with us, support@roestcoffee.com, and we are really happy to help. So that's everything I wanted to share today. And hopefully I've given you some idea of why we're so excited about this little roaster. And I like we're shipping the first ones now, the first production versions, and I can't wait to see what you guys, that is our customers, can do with it. I can't wait to taste the coffee that you guys are going to be able to roast with this amazing little machine. So please send it in, and I hope to talk to you soon. And then, yeah, that's it from me. So we're going to move over to questions, and I will pull up the document where we're keeping an eye on what questions are coming in. Okay. So first question I have here is, if the camera malfunctions or breaks, is the roaster still usable, or will it throw an error and be non-functional until the camera is fixed? Yeah, the camera is not essential. We're not using it to control any part of the roasting at the moment. So we have done plenty of roasting without the camera. We are constantly testing firmware upgrades, and it's, you know, when you're testing things, things break. So yeah, not having the camera is not a problem. So don't worry about that. And next question we have, somewhere I saw a recommendation of using external fans on the ducts. Okay, so in general, the P3000 works slightly differently to a conventional roaster. So in a conventional roaster, your main fan is downstream of the roaster. So it is sucking air into the machine and then pushing it through the pipework. P3000 is a bit different, where the fans are upstream of the roaster. So all the air is pushed into the roaster, which means positive pressure, and then it's positive pressure in the ducting as well. Now, in most cases, you don't need an extra fan downstream, but if you have a single duct with multiple things connected into it, for example, or if you have a very, and I'm saying very long ducting run, then you might need to give a little boost, or just make sure that there's negative or at least neutral pressure in that ducting, in which case an external fan is a good idea. But for the vast majority of setups, so every setup we've seen so far, that's not necessary. Again, the best thing to do is to keep your ducting separate from anything else and just let it be neutral pressure, and you don't need an external fan or anything like that. Okay. Thibaut asks, is BTIT profiling the same as on the L100 Plus? And the short answer is yes. That is what I described. For anyone who's not familiar already, BTIT profiling is the kind of profile I discussed where it is based on bean temperature instead of on time. And so what that means is, instead of saying, okay, at 2 minutes, I want you to crank the heat up, and at 4 minutes, I want you to reduce the heat, you say, okay, at 150 degrees, crank the heat up. When the beans reach first crack at 200 degrees, then bring it back down, something like that. And yep, that is already part of the P3000, of course. What would I consider a long run? 4 meters. Yeah, I think for more specific questions about ventilation, I'm going to say best thing is to get in touch with support and talk about your specific needs. I can't say specifically what is too long of a run, because there's so many factors that affect that. It depends on the ventilation you're building, it depends on the kind of pipework you use, it depends on how many kind of bends there are, and so on and so on. So get in touch with us. We are happy to also talk to your ventilation or your installation people and kind of work out for you what the best solution is. Although I would say 4 meters is not especially long. So if you're thinking about 4 meters, don't worry. Okay. Pavel says, is there anything to say about the afterburner? Yeah, so I didn't talk about this in the webinar because we haven't got a lot more that we can officially announce yet. Work is still ongoing on the automatic bean feeder and on the afterburner. So the bean feeder is going to automatically weigh out your green coffee, load it into the machine, start the roast, and allow you to collect it at the end without any human interaction at all. So that's super exciting. We are into manufacturing prototypes for those, but we are still waiting to see how those prototypes turn out. I believe one of them is on the water right now. So we will hopefully be able to say more about that very soon. And then the afterburner is in a similar situation. I actually have a prototype afterburner connected to this machine. It's hidden behind there because it is, it's a prototype that we built here in the workshop rather than with manufactured parts. So it's not the most beautiful looking thing, but it works really very well. So we're confident that the afterburner will work well. What we are working out now is the manufacturing, and we will hopefully be able to give you more information on that soon, but I can't really say more than that about pricing or availability or specs or anything like that at this time. Okay. Any update on certification, shipping, and delivery for USA customers? Yeah, so certification is something that we don't have a huge amount of control over. We're working on it both for Europe and the US, but it's a little bit of a black box in terms of how long that process is going to take. So right now, I can't tell you more. I would say if you are already in the queue for a machine, or if you're thinking about buying, talk to the sales team. They always have the most up-to-date information. They can give you a much better estimate of when you might be able to get a machine than I can right here, because there's so many variables. So I won't get into it more than that. But if any of you are wondering about pricing, availability, certification, all of those things, please contact sales@roestcoffee.com, and they'll be happy to help you out. Auto cooling tray drop. Yeah, so I did allude to this with the bean loader. The cooling tray door is electronically controlled as well. In fact, I might as well show you right now. So if you grab your bucket and you have your bucket here for collecting your batches of roasted coffee, if I push this button on the screen, then the cooling tray will empty itself. It's a little bit noisy, so I'm going to close it up again. But yeah, basically what this means is, because this is electronic, we have the ability to control this remotely. Now, it's not something we've put into the firmware just now, but it's something that we anticipate doing in the future, where we can, for example, set the machine to automatically open the hopper and load the batch when your BBP is finished, when your between batch protocol reaches its target. And then when the beans are cold, so 3 minutes after the roast, to automatically open and empty into your bucket. We haven't implemented that yet, but there's no technical reason why we couldn't. This is something that we are definitely going to build into the bean loader, because it's kind of an essential part of that workflow. So what it's going to look like without the bean loader is something that we still need to do a little bit of design work on. Okay. Is the currently available setup, is the next question, suitable for airflow and humidity measurement, or will that be a later option? So the machines that we're shipping right now have these sensors installed on them. So we've installed humidity sensors and airflow volume sensors on all the machines that are shipping right now. So when I say that they're still in development, the things that we still need to do are work on validating and calibrating those results, and on building the control systems that actually use that information. So at the moment, right now on this machine, I can see the airflow measurement, and we've tested it against external measures so that we know that it's working well. But this is not currently going into the logs. It's not currently something that I can control directly. So when I did the experiments based around airflow volume, I was controlling it manually, just controlling the fan to hit the airflow volume that I was looking for. But this is something that we are actively working on. And yeah, I think it's super exciting. I haven't seen anything like it on roasters of this scale. This is the kind of measurement that you really only see at industrial scales normally. And we're really happy to be bringing it to a bigger audience. And do I still have more questions? Oh yeah, sorry. So right now I've been answering the ones that were in the chat, but we did have a few people also that sent in questions beforehand. So I'm going to come to those. And there are some questions about pricing and availability in different countries and things like that. I'm not going to get into those specifics right now, because the situation is a little bit different for different individuals, for different countries. So what I would say is, if you're thinking about, if you're wondering if we have distributors or if we're looking for distributors, if you're wondering about pricing and availability in your particular country, contact the sales team. That's all I'll say here. But we will give you as much information as we can. So yeah, sales are the best people to answer those questions. We have a question about optimal batch sizes. And this is an interesting one, because to me, it reveals something that nearly all roaster manufacturers are guilty of, which is they say, here's our 6 kilo roaster. But actually, everyone knows that if you want good results, you can only really roast 4. And this is not how we operate. So when we say 3 kilograms, we really mean it. And you can see that in the roast, like on the live view of the roast that we did together just now. A 3 kilo batch is 7 minutes. that is pretty fast. And there's headroom to go faster if you want to. So the roaster has plenty of power to develop a 3 kilo batch in the way that you want to. So in terms of where the sweet spot is, I would say there's no upper limit. There's no point at which, okay, it's good for production, but it's not so good for flavor. We don't work that way. At the other end of the scale, you can go down to 1 kilo and you still get good temperature readings. You can still kind of roast in a conventional way. If you go below 1 kilo, then it becomes harder to interpret things like the bean temperature readings, because at that point, the probes are not completely covered. Some of the hot air is influencing the reading. You can roast, but you need to be a bit smart about how you interpret your data in that case. So I would say between 1 and 3 kilos, but quality-wise, there's no cutoff. And then venting requirements we talked about, and then the between batch protocol. So the between batch protocol, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a profile that runs after the batch ends and before the next one starts. And this is designed to basically reset the thermal energy of the machine. So at the end of the roast, your drum is usually a bit hotter than it is at the start, depending on how you roast. And if you want every roast to be the same, then your drum needs to be the same temperature every time you start. And on a conventional roaster, the way you do that is you cool the roaster down for a certain period of time, then you reheat it to a certain temperature, and then perhaps you let it fall down again to your charge temperature and you charge. And you have to tune how long you cool it for, how long you reheat it for, until you find the exact length of time that means that every roast turns out the same as the next. And this is a really laborious process of trial and error until you get it right. And then, of course, the season changes or the coffee changes, and you have to go through the whole process again. So between batch protocol is a very necessary but very painful part of roasting on a manual roaster. And the whole idea behind it is you're trying to control the temperature of the drum. But in a roaster like P3000, we have a shortcut, which is like just so simple. We just measure the temperature of the drum, and we actually measure it in 3 different places and take an average. So we have a very good picture of how hot the drum is and how evenly heated it is. And we can use that information to make sure that every roast starts identically. And that takes out all of the guesswork, takes out all of that trial and error, and it makes the replication perfect. So between batch protocol for me is very much simplified on this roaster. I set a profile to cool the roaster down, and you can choose how fast or slowly you want to cool down based on, what the temperature of the incoming air is, and that's what your profile does. And then when the drum reaches target temperature, the machine will alert you. And depending on your setup, if we've got the automated bean feeder going, at that point, it'll just charge the next batch. Otherwise, the machine will just alert you that it's ready to charge the next one. Okay. We had a question from Nina. Hi, Nina, about the single phase. So I mentioned that the machines are being configured for 3-phase right now, but we will be offering a single phase version in the future. And in Europe, single phase, like a typical single phase installation, goes up to 32 amps, which doesn't have quite as much power as a 3-phase 400 volt installation. So the single phase elements that we're going to be working with draw a maximum of 6.6 kilowatts, whereas the 3-phase elements draw 9.9. So you have roughly 2/3 the amount of power available. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use the roaster in the same way that we used it today. Because if you look at the roast that we just did, the peak power was a little bit over 75%. So single phase would need to be a tiny bit slower than that, but not a lot. So there is still enough power to roast a 3 kilo batch, as long as you don't mind going a little bit slower, or you can still roast at 6-7 minutes if you want to, as long as you don't mind using just a slightly smaller batch size. So you will lose some throughput. You will either have to roast a little bit slower or use slightly smaller batch sizes, but which of those is more important to you, that's really up to you. Okay. And then the next question we have here is about profile transfer. And this is a super interesting one. So can we transfer profiles from the sample roaster to the P3000? And yes, it uses the same software. So your roasters are going to be connected in that sense. What we don't have yet is a method for directly transferring a profile from one to the other. Now, we do have plans to build tools to help you make that transfer, but it's worth bearing in mind that these are 2 quite different roasters. So even if you get the bean curve identical between the two, the roast outcome won't be exactly the same. So we have to be a bit smarter than just replicating the profile in the kind of conventional way, where if you get the same bean curve, you assume the results are the same, because we know that's not true. But we think we can develop tools that will help you ensure that you get roast outcomes in terms of flavor, in terms of color and weight loss, that are very close between the two. And we're going to do that based on the data that we build, that we get from roasting. So this is something that we'll be working on in the future. We have exciting plans for it, but there is no easy way right now to make that transfer. And let me see. Okay. I think the remaining questions here are, again, more sales related questions. So again, if you wanted to know about availability, things like that, please get in touch with the sales team. They are the best people to answer that. Okay, and we had a couple more come in from the chat. So as far as scaling, can multiple P3000s roast identical profiles simultaneously with accuracy? And the answer is yes. So you might already know that if you connect two identical roasters side by side, two conventional roasters, you don't necessarily get the same output. And one of the big reasons for that is that the installation is always slightly different. One of them is closer to the chimney, one of them is further away, one of them, the ducting has to travel further. That influences the airflow, that influences the roasting outcome. There's other things as well, but those are some of the big ones. And what we think is that by measuring the airflow volume, controlling the roasts that way, it's going to be very, very much easier to get identical roast outcomes between the two machines. There's other tools as well, and we have done this work a lot with people who have multiple sample roasters, because this is something that's very common. Big green buying companies that are roasting thousands of samples every year. They use multiple machines. They need all of those machines to work in as close to as each other as possible. And there are things that we can do right now in terms of adjusting the fan speed and things like that to bring those roasters into sync so that they perform the same way. What we're trying to do with the P3000 is essentially automate that process. And yeah, we do have, like I said, we do have one customer who's using two machines side by side already and is very happy with the results. But we are confident that we can do more, that you could have a whole battery of these, and by controlling the airflow, by having those super accurate temperature measurements, you can be really, really sure that the results coming out are identical, much more so than is possible with any other machine at present. Can the camera detect when yellowing starts? Now, this is something that we definitely intend to work on. Color measurement is a complex topic, and there's a lot of things that we need to do before we're going to be confident about the color measurements. And one of those things is we need to be able to tell the camera where the edges of a bean are. And that's something that we need to develop a computer vision module for, which is something that we're working on model for. We're also working with external consultants on getting accurate color readings and comparing those to a color standard so that we can do things like calibrate those readings against established roasted coffee degrees. So all of these things are things we're working on. I can say pretty confidently that yes, the camera will be able to mark yellowing in the future, but this is not something that is a feature right now. And this is something that Sverre said in this morning's session, and I want to repeat now. Most of our work up till now has been focused on the hardware, getting the hardware working, getting the machine roasting so that we can get it out to market. The functionality is already good, but the focus has been on getting the hardware, the last few little bits and pieces perfect. The software, the firmware developments that are coming as these machines go out will be pushed out straight away to everyone who already has the machine, and that will be unlocking a lot more potential. So what we have on the bench already is, it's already a lot of fun to work with. It's already very easy to get delicious coffee from. But there's so much more to come, and I'm really excited to see how that develops. And those software updates, whether it's color measurement, whether it's bean size, whether it's airflow, all of those things are going to give us so much more power and so much more control than this roaster, which already has more power and control than any I've worked on. Okay, troubleshooting. What are the workflows when power goes out or screen freezes to avoid fires? Okay, Hopefully you will never have to know this, but yeah, this is something that is very important to think about. The P3000 is not like a conventional drum roaster. So in a typical drum roaster, you have this naked flame underneath the drum, and if you get a fire inside the drum, the last thing you want to do is to empty the beans out into a cooling tray, because suddenly they're exposed to fresh air and that can cause a flare up and so on and so on. With the P3000, it's a little bit different. There is no flame. The heating elements are at the back of the roaster, a little bit away from the drum, but the heating elements need airflow through them to moderate their temperature. If you cut off the airflow, which is what you would do in a fire in a conventional roaster, if you cut off the airflow here, then you're actually then potentially exposing those heating elements to higher temperatures. So the safety methods on here are a little bit different. There's actually a button underneath the front here, which we call the panic button, which is there for you to press if something happens and you need to shut off the power to the elements, reduce the fan speed as much as possible. For example, if you have a fire, or if the drum gets stuck on something, like somebody's dropped a nail in your coffee or whatever it is, panic button is there to power down safely and to try and kind of to control the heat. So yeah, that's your first port of call. That powers down the elements. It reduces the fan speed as much as possible. At that point, it's generally best to get the beans out of the drum rather than leaving them in there, because the airflow still needs to continue through the drum. So then we have manual overrides. So you can actually manually open the drop door. You can manually turn the drum. So if you have a complete loss of power, you can still get the coffee out. It's actually relatively easy to still empty the batch. And then once it's in the cooling tray, of course, because you press the panic button, the fans are stopped, so the cooling tray is not going to cause a big flare-up in the way that it would on a conventional roaster. Drop the beans into here, give them a spritz with water. This is solid steel, so this is the safest place for the beans to be if you do end up with a roaster fire. We haven't experienced any yet, at least not ones that we didn't create deliberately for testing. But that is roughly speaking the process. If you get the machine, we'll talk you through it in more detail. We'll show you how that works. Is it possible to record live view? I'm assuming here that the question is about can we record the live camera view, the bean data? And the answer is right now we haven't built that in. But the plan is that we will be adding some of that data to your roast logs. And it probably won't be like a complete video, because that data is not very useful, but there will be snapshots of the most important stages during the roast. So you can see what the coffee looked like at the beginning, how it changed color at yellowing, how it changed size coming up to first crack, and the color at the end. Something like that, for example, is something that we'll be adding to your roast logs. If you want to record it externally, maybe there will be features for that, because this roaster also has much better connectivity than the sample roaster. So if a lot of customers want to record the entire roasting process, then that is potentially something that we could develop in the future. Okay. Then we have, what is the product lifespan? Is it designed to be modular, so any new updates or modifications can be made easily? And as far as the lifespan goes, we haven't built it with a limited lifespan in mind. And of course, ask us again in a couple of decades how long the lifespan is, because we haven't experienced any of those kind of failures yet. But I think the key point to make here is, just like with the sample roaster, this principle of open design also means that when we design new features, as much as possible, we design them in a way that they can be retrofitted into existing machines. And we haven't obviously done this on the P3000 yet because it's brand new. But if you talk to people who own the sample roaster, you can find out that when we started out, a lot of the features that we have now, like the inlet temperature, like the automatic first crack detection, didn't exist when we first started building those machines. But when we developed them, we tried to make them in a way that if you already had the machine, you could slot it in. You could open up your machine, switch a few parts around, slot it in, and keep your machine up to date. And that's something that we've followed since the beginning, and it's something that we've continued here and will continue here. So as much as possible, we'll make it as easy as we can to upgrade, to keep your machine up to date with whatever new sensors we come up with next. And we seem to be addicted. We can't stop adding sensors. Okay. And that is all we have time for. I'm hoping I've answered. If any of you are listening, I haven't answered your question, then you can always follow up afterwards. You can drop me an email. It's tom@roastcoffee.com. We will also be following up with people after the webinar. So if I didn't get to you, we will answer your question as soon as we can. But that's it. I just want to say thank you all for coming, for asking smart questions, for listening to me.